So 1 Samuel 15, I think, is a crucial passage. And I'm convinced that the author of 1 Samuel 15 is aware of some of these tensions in his texts, that he reads his Pentateuch and he finds two texts that say God relented, and then he goes to Balaam's prophecy and he sees a text saying God doesn't relent. And nothing in the Pentateuch really tells us exactly what we're supposed to do with that or brings those two things together. But 1 Samuel 15 does. And the context in which he does that is Saul, which I think reveals a bit more about what he's thinking, because he's going to want to distinguish what happens with Saul from what happens with David. It's going to be very important that God is able to make promises of the kind which he has given to David, and the kind which he has given to David is irrevocable, which assumes a lot. You know, if you or I want to make a promise, there's always that issue of, will further information show that I was kind of dumb to make that promise? But God has to be able to make that promise. And that promise has to somehow be understood. The whole, book narrative from Samuel through Kings ultimately ends with exile. So we have to somehow understand how God's faithfulness can be maintained despite the disasters of exile, and how exile doesn't represent what happened with Saul. David's not rejected in the same way. Okay. So we have to really, he wants to really understand, I think, his Bible, the Pentateuch, and what does it mean that God, sometimes it says God relents and sometimes it says he doesn't. And he also wants to theologically be able to understand what happens with Saul and what what implications that has for God's will and God's decision making. And so he writes us a text that has both of them in, and we have near, of course, it begins with God telling Saul to go kill the Amalekites, and Saul does not carry out God's command, not for the first time. He does not follow the word of the Lord. And then God tells Samuel, I regret that I made Saul king. Samuel is angry all night long and prays all night long, and then he heads out to go confront Saul. And in the course of their confrontation, where Saul initially lies, and then when he finally receives this hammer blow that the kingdom has been taken away from him, he tries to bargain. He tries to get God to change his mind. And then Samuel says, no, God doesn't. God is the Holy One of Israel, who does not repent, who is not a man that he should repent or that he should lie. And then the text comes right back around after a few more details to concluding with, because God had repented or relented from making Saul king. And those are all the same Hebrew verb there. So what's going on with the text? I think I probably should have said a little bit more about it on the chapter, and I'm thinking about doing a longer treatment right now. I think the first thing to notice in the difference between the two speeches is the extra details we get, that it is specifically because God is not a man that we can't say he repents. And that's an important detail, because if we're trying to draw out the logic of what Samuel is arguing, it kind of has to have a premise like, only men repent, or at least only humans or creatures repent, or something like that. But God isn't one, therefore God doesn't repent. And that's actually, that premise is pretty close to turning it around and saying, so if you're describing God as repenting, you're describing him as a human being. So he's specifically saying repenting and lying are a human kind of thing to do. God is not a human kind of being. He's a different kind of being. He has a different nature. Therefore, he doesn't repent. So that extra information, I think, gives us the lens through which to read the other two statements. If we just had that statement, then maybe we conclude that you couldn't say what he says earlier, that God repented. But since he did, I think it gives us the lens through which to look at it. He must be describing God in not a human way. But we don't have to stop there. And I think there's a couple other considerations that strengthen this reading of the passage I'm giving. And the first one comes by just rolling right through into the next chapter, where Samuel is still kind of moping around because he's depressed about the whole situation. It wasn't his idea in the first place to have a king, but God told him to listen to the people, and now it's all gone off the rails and he's depressed. But God says, stop moping. There's a king that I've chosen for myself, and you need to go anoint him. And what is the key theme of 1 Samuel 16? It actually has to do with vision and how humans look at things versus how God looks at things. And it turns out in the course of this that that we have several of Jesse's sons stand up, and Samuel looks at them and he draws the conclusion, you are the, God has chosen this one. But he's wrong every time. It just seems like God has chosen that one. Why? Because they're tall and strong and handsome, just like Saul. But in the end, it turns out to be David. And why? Because God looks at the heart, but man looks at the visible appearances of things. So right away in the next chapter, we have this theme of appearances being highlighted as one of the key points. I think at that point, we're kind of invited to go back and kind of reread the book and ask if we really understood everything that's happened. And one of the things you notice as you go through the Saul narrative is that every time that Saul is described as being chosen by God with that word, it's either in a question, which you would think is a rhetorical question, but maybe you should go back and read it as an actual question, or it's the people who've chosen him. In other words, God never actually chooses him. God does command that Samuel should listen to the people. God does command Samuel to make him king, but God never says that he chose him once. So I think if we try to bring what's going on in the book of Samuel all together, we have to use this word like irony, or the things being different than the way they appear. And I think the reading that we have to give is that why did God make a promise to Saul and then it didn't work out? Well, of course, the promise is always conditional anyway, which is different than the promise to David. So we have to bring that in. But also, I think part of what's going on here is that people have assumed that Saul, that they discerned God's ultimate plan of election in Saul, and they've gotten it wrong because it just appeared to be this way. But actually, God's ultimate plan of election was David. And you can actually go back and show all the way in the very first few chapters of Samuel, we already have language that very clearly is expecting David to be the one who God chooses as Messiah. Saul was never meant to be the Messiah. And so if we come back to 1 Samuel 15, I think all of this suggests very strongly that that's what the author is saying here, that it might appear to us, our human eyes, that God has repented, that he's made a mistake and had to go back on it, or that he's somehow been unfaithful to his promise, imagine you're in exile in Babylon, and you think of the story of Saul, and the moral you draw is God might go back on his promise. It would be a very hopeless place to be in. And the author wants to tell us, no, it seems that way, but it's not actually that way. God knew what was going to happen with Saul the whole time, although we may have to describe him as repenting, because he's not a man. He has a higher level of knowledge. He can see things that we can't see.
Right.
And so I think that I could continue on like this for a while, but to make a long story short, the idea of appearances and how things look versus how they actually are is right there in the text. We don't have to impose that from outside.